We're back with Season 8, Episode 7, I think? Yes. Episode 7, Horseplay. This is the episode in which they put on a play with horses. And Celestia, and she's not very good at it, but that's okay. It's okay. We can make this work. We can make this work. So the first thing I want to talk about in this episode is that apparently it's been... We have a timer. It has been 1,111 years since the first raising of the sun. First of all, I do think that's a cool thing to celebrate an anniversary of. When I get to my 111th anniversary, I'll totally do the same thing. Second of all, of course, Pinky is the one who kept track of that and is the one who actually was on top of that, because why wouldn't she be? So Celestia is, of course, really excited about the play, and she's totally into it. After all, Celestia is a total geek, as we've established many times. It's part of her appeal. And, of course, someone like Celestia would be into plays. Now, plays are a little bit different, but video games and movies and shows are in many ways just kind of a continuation / expansion on the play concept. A bunch of people get together and coordinate and work together in order to, reach out to and cause entertainment upon another, right? Cause entertainment? I'm going to inflict entertainment upon you. And that makes perfect sense, right? There's a lot of obvious, oh yeah, no, that tracks kind of a thing going on here. I find myself wondering if something like plays are literally, plays, concerts, that kind of a thing, are literally a cultural pastime in Equestria. I have nothing to base that on other than the sentences in this very episode. We do know they do plays. They've done several. We do know they do concerts. We've seen several. It's just, I find myself wondering if this is a bigger deal than normal because of the whole, harmony, working together thing, right? Just food for thought, especially since they don't have things like television and video games. But to my knowledge, yes, this is the first time the timeline is very explicitly, directly referenced within this. Like they mentioned 1,000 years when it comes to the Luna thing, but that's a vague term, not a specific. This is the exact date. Unlike 1,111 years, which is a very specific date kind of a thing. So there is a distinction there. If you say something happened 2,367 years ago, then you're being pretty specific. If you say something happened 2 millennia ago, then you're being pretty vague. So, there's actually something else they codified in this episode too, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I love Celestia's face when it's suggested that she take over to play the lead. And, as usual, this Spike is the one who has the brain in this episode, because either Spike or Twilight can have the brain, and neither can they share it between them, so... Yay. Anyways, yeah, exactly, Darth Vader. It's just a vague 1,000 years, which is, well, it's vague. It's vague for a reason. It's so that the writers don't have to keep track of a calendar. So, Celestia mentions she's never acted before, and has just, oh, God, attack, and has just been offered the lead position in a play, starring her. Or about her, I should say. Yeah. Now, if they had rewritten the play to give her effectively a smaller role, or to make it so that she wasn't the lead, or to make it so it worked in a different direction, this might have worked out. The problem is, she was given the lead role in her first acting job ever. Some people are naturally good at acting. That's called inclination. But most people are not. I would like to go ahead and say that I actually am a decent actor at this point in my life. Do you think I started that way? I actually, very embarrassedly, remember my first few attempts at acting. They were not good. One time, I freaked out so much over stumbling over the line. So, sorry, let me work this back. I was freaking out because I was stressed. And then I stumbled over my lines. And I got so worked up over stumbling over my lines that I literally ended up running away. Physically running away from the session where we were all standing reading lines when they were trying to figure out who to cast as whom. Before you ask, I was 12 or 11, one of the two, at that point in time. That's when I first started getting into acting. But yeah, practice helps is what I'm trying to say. And it's funny because I do absolutely see a lot of the early mistakes in acting in Celestia, but we'll come back to that in just a second. The first thing I want to talk to you about is nepotism. How many of you know what nepotism is? Since I only have two viewers right now, I'll ask both of you. What do you think nepotism means? Before I continue. Take a drink. I gotta wait. Oh, we have a third person! So, Lord Harrimont says, giving someone a job or role to someone based on a familial connection and not competence. Relying on personal ties to have power. We have a fourth! Oh my god, we have 4 viewers. And Imperial Star Destroyer says, holy crap. Okay, let's just skip forward. If you asked me about 30 minutes ago what the definition of nepotism is, I would say giving favoritism with regards to power and especially jobs for someone who is a friend or relative, regardless of the talent involved, regardless of their competency, as Lord Harrimont says. I decided to look it up. Would you believe that's not actually the literal definition of nepotism? Because the literal definition of nepotism is favoring giving people jobs because they're relatives or friends. End statement. What's really amusing about that to me is that chopping off the last part of that sentence drastically changes the definition of nepotism. Because by that definition, I'm a super big nepotism person. I'm super into nepotism, absolutely, 100%. Because I do absolutely favor giving jobs to people who are friends or family. ... Because of their competence. Because of the fact that I know them and I know what they're good at. I know what they can do, and I know their particular talents, and I know how to try and push them in order to get them into things that they either want to do, or can grow as, or are already capable of. And that's specifically the reason. But according to the literal definition of nepotism... but yes, so the problem here is giving someone a role regardless of talent. Well, that's what I would go ahead and say is the... there's a term for that, the common definition or whatever. You know what I mean by that, right? If you don't, there's literal definitions and then there's common definitions, or whatever it's actually called. And a common definition is something that is how people tend to use a word regardless of the literal definition. And common definitions usually tend to overtake literal definitions over time, and yada yada yada. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. Point being, Twilight's doing the bad form of nepotism. Let's just call that what it is. Giving her the role despite literally knowing that she doesn't have the talent to back it up. Which is not something I would do. Unless I was trying to help someone to grow and develop. That is a little bit different. Like if... I'm trying to think of a specific example that doesn't name drop anyone. If I wanted to give my sister an acting role. She's not great at acting, but she is okay at acting and she wants to get better at it. It's just something she wants to branch out into. So giving her a role that pushes her a bit would be, would be me kind of giving her something that she's not competent at, because I specifically want this to be practice and a learning experience for her to get better as an actress. Anyways, we're getting out in the weeds. The point is, that's absolutely not what's happening here. Celestia would certainly like to be a better actress. Giving someone who is just starting acting the lead role is not what I was just referencing in my asterisk. You give Celestia something that is, a way to wean her into that. Give her a role that's going to push her, sir. Don't give her the role that the entire play sits upon. Don't make Chris Pratt Mario, is what I'm trying to say. Which is funny, because that is a natural segue to the next thing I'm going to talk about. Everyone freaks out about the fact that Celestia is going to be in the play. Everyone loves it. The main 6 all freak out about it. Starlight freaks out about it, and she's usually better about this kind of thing. Twilight's super into this idea. Rainbow rushes off and tells everyone who are all super mega excited about the idea. This is exactly why real-life Hollywood tends to cast expensive stars in projects. Because people will be more interested in it because of the fact that it's got Chris Pratt in it. Now, that is also a fallacy in several ways. Because what you are doing is you're building hype at the expense of the overall production. Because the cost of those stars is usually high. In real life, that's in terms of money, and therefore your budget is going to be substantially less. And in this exact case within this episode, the cost is your production's going to suck, because Celestia is a terrible actress. Anyway, so this then leads to Starlight's biggest freak out. She's talking about, oh my god, can I mean, she's a princess. Can you imagine, like, doing all these things, blowing your nose around one, or, and this is the one that she freaks out over most, just sitting around and talking with a princess. As usual, Starlight is one of the most relatable people, because I have to personally admit that one of the more stressful circumstances that I tend to kind of do, and I'm an extrovert, is just sitting around hanging with someone. I've said before that there's exactly one person in the world that I could just sit around and hang with without conversation and be comfortable with. Everyone else, there has to be something to talk about, otherwise I just kind of slowly descend into madness. And then I start playing Bloodborne. So, I'm kind of with her on that one. This, of course, then leads to her comment that Twilight is not a princess. Which is true. Ignoring the fact that Twilight does not behave like a princess and does not have royal duties in the same sense that Celestia does, there's also always been a very clear and very overt pecking order to the chain of command of princesses. Celestia, Luna, Cadence, Twilight, right? That's, you could argue Luna and Cadence, but either way, Celestia's always been at the top and Twilight's always been at the bottom. So, yeah, no. Twilight is not a princess. She doesn't act it, she doesn't have the role of it, and she's the bottom person on the totem pole. So then the Student 6 comes out as unicorns. Cool. And this is where we bring up the continuity thing, the lose powers to raise the sun thing. We actually talked about that all the way back in season 2 or 3, I forget which it was, when we were reading the book, The Journal of the Two Sisters. But that's actually finally in the show and can be 100% no really counted as canon, which really makes you think about it. They even mention in this episode the flaw, or not the flaw, but so the problem that caused. Every time they raised the sun, 6 unicorns just don't have their power. Like, they have drained their magic. Or 5, because Star Swirl was able to bypass that because he was Star Swirl. This is, as usual, some pretty cool, interesting world building, but it especially is fascinating in the wake of the world building we've been having lately. One of the things I've been talking about in many of the recent episodes is the idea of just how bad this area was before that. In Star Swirl's time. The time in which you didn't have time or ability for friendship. And the time when there were enemies everywhere and the place wasn't tamed. They didn't have control of the thing. They didn't have harmony, yada, 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 right? The quote-unquote dark times. The idea that they had to literally sacrifice the magic of unicorns in order to function, in order to have the sun, absolutely ties in with the idea of the dark times, no pun intended. So, plus to story, world building. So then we get to Celestia acting. Oh my god. Oh my god. Obviously, the person who wrote this and the actress in question knows what bad acting is. They've probably been there, just like I have, and just like anyone else who's ever acted has. Because again, you don't just snap into acting. It's not like, hey, and I'm a good actor. No, it's just, no. Instead, what we have is going down the list of bad acting. All the mistakes we all made back in the day. First thing, not knowing your timing. Not knowing when you're supposed to go on stage and do something. Second problem, breaking the fourth wall when you're not supposed to. Waving at the audience. Hi, Mom, right? Well, we all did that, right? Oh, okay, those of us who active did that. Then we move on to not knowing your cue, which is different from timing. That's going out there and there's a nice big pause, a blank, empty pause in the play because someone has forgotten that it's their turn to speak, hence forgetting their cue. I'm sure you've seen that at least once. If you've been involved in acting, you've probably personally done that at least once. Lord knows I have. Oh, exactly, Darth Medora. Like I said, most actors have been through these steps. They just go down the list. That then leads to not projecting, my personal favorite. This was actually the hardest one for me to learn. Of all the things of acting, it took me years to really figure out how to project my voice. And it's a talent. It's hard to explain, but I literally hold my chest differently. I'm doing it right now in order to talk. And when you get on stage, it's a completely different way of breathing and physically holding your chest. So your lungs are a little bit different, and there's just like this open chasm of being able to speak out like this, right? It's different. Because if you just yell, well, that's the other thing, isn't it? Because you're either talking too quietly or you're yelling. And neither of those are what you want when you want to project. Like I said, it took me forever to learn proper projections. That was the one I sympathized with the most, personally. Then we get to the final one. This is probably the most nebulous example of bad acting, and is also probably the one that the most actors have encountered. Not knowing how to take stage direction. What I mean by that, usually directors, and I've been guilty of this too, not anymore, this is a while ago, but they'll tell you something vague. Oh, let's use a random example. Be more Jedi-like. Now, the problem with that kind of direction is, let's be honest, it's not direction. If you give that kind of a direction, what you're doing is you're putting all of the direction on the actual actor or actress. Now, that kind of direction can work if you happen to be telling that to a very experienced actor or actress. If you're telling it to someone who's never been on stage before, you have given them nothing. And so they start trying to give her direction, and it doesn't really work at all. Instead, they use these vague... Twilight uses these vague, generic terms in order to try and get her to give a better performance, instead of actually giving her specific, proper direction, which, in my opinion, boils down to two things. One, actually talking about the physicality of acting, like I just talked about with my chest and projecting. And two, getting motivation and perspective so that the actor can put themselves into the mind of the character, which is the other big thing about directing. That's just my opinion as a director. There's lots of different styles of direction. But once again, you see that you see the idea of them, of how this is just going down the list of all the mistakes we all made back in the day. Or I see we all. I keep doing that. I keep assuming that. Sorry. All those mistakes most acting talent has made back in the day. So she screws up at everything. Okay, cool. Then Twilight refuses to be honest. We'll come back to that. So this then leads to her having absolutely no sense of timing. I know that this is now the third type of timing we've talked about, but let me explain what I mean by that. This is actually better expressed as she has no sense of rhythm. Now, I have no rhythm myself, and I used to suck at this thing personally, so I actually sympathize with this. But there's a difference between knowing your timing, that's when you go out to do stuff, knowing your cues, that's knowing when to speak your lines, and knowing your rhythm, knowing how to do something like a dance number, for example, or knowing how to stay in step with someone else. There's a whole skill set just of being able to match the tempo of someone else. And it's harder to do than it sounds. Then she does the wrong emphasis on the incorrect syllable. Which, I mean, what else do I have to add to that? This is actually something I hear a lot, especially in people who are just beginning to act. Because one of the most common problems, and I'm not actually 100% sure why this happens, is that people, when they are acting, when they're reading a line of dialogue, don't think about the dialogue as something that you say. They think about it as reading. You've probably seen this many, many times. You may or may not have done this. There's the idea of people who just sort of read something on the page without any kind of tempo or pace to it, without altering how they speak as they are doing it. So there's that thing, right? Then there's people who try to understand the lines as they're going through it in order to read it, and they're so focused on getting the words right that they don't say it properly. And this is also extremely common. This is even worse when you're memorizing a line, because some people have trouble with memorization as well. Obviously not Fluttershy, she mentions that early on, but I just thought I'd point that out. So, whoops. Yeah. So, this then leads to Applejack. I think at this point, Applejack has, for the third time now, told her to just be honest. Twilight says no. There's actually a good reason why. We're still going to build up to that. But first, we have to talk about the third option. Let's just cancel the play. It'll suck, but that way we don't have to crush Celestia's dreams. We don't have to crush everyone else's dreams because they don't know the play even exists. Win-win. This is exactly when Rainbow shows up and says, hey, I told everyone. Thanks, Rainbow. Thanks. Appreciate that. Good job. So that's out. Well, now what do we do? They say truth is a huge part of friendship. AJ specifically says this to Twilight. And Twilight says making another friend's dreams come true is a huge part of friendship. This is where the episode gets me. Up until this point, the episode had kind of lost me, and I was kind of down on it. But this is the moment at which they actually take this from the stereotypical "we're going to lie to our friends" thing and turn it into something a little bit more nuanced. It's not that hard to understand Twilight's mentality here. All you have to do is picture a friend of yours, or someone you care about, who really wants to do X and is not that good at X. What do? The easy answer is tell them they suck at X. Allow me to personally disagree with that. I don't think that's really going to help anything. Now, to explain that a little bit, though, I don't mean lie to them, and I don't mean tell them they're great, because that's not going to help anything either. The actual solution to this is, of course, substantially more nuanced. You have to actually approach them and say, listen, you're not doing all that well. Celestia, you're not that good of an actress. And we're trying to work through you with this, but it's just not working out. So we're going to make some effort, and we're going to give some actual proper critique. And this is kind of the big thing. One of the biggest mistakes most people make is they say, you suck, and that's the end of the sentence. They look at someone and they say, well, you have failed at this. You're bad at video games, or you're bad at acting, or you're bad at music, or you're bad at painting, or whatever. End statement. No information has been conveyed. Not really. What you do then is you critique. This is one of the reasons I have that phrase. I don't like to criticize without critiquing. So you give ideas of how to improve. Okay, so hang on, Celestia, you're losing it here. Throw yourself out of the situation for a second. Stop thinking about the lines as an actress and start thinking about it as yourself. Try to put yourself, remember what it was like back in the day. Put yourself back into that memory and sit there and think of what you were feeling at the time. Really process that. Don't actually say any lines. I just want you to get up on stage. This is how I would direct her, by the way. Just get up on stage and try to put yourself into that moment and just let yourself remember that for a bit. And then I just sit there for a minute or two or three or however long it took for her to really get into that headspace. And you critique, you give ideas of how to improve. It's a bit of a shame the episode doesn't really go in this direction. Instead, what we have is the acting lessons. Now, this is not how you do acting lessons. These two improv actors are not exactly bad actors, but they are terrible teachers. And that's speaking as someone who is a terrible teacher. Because what they do is they just jump immediately into acting themselves, expecting Celestia to follow through on that. Once again, no information is being conveyed. All they're doing is demonstrating through example, which some people can learn by. But not everyone, and there's no gradient, and there's no instruction. There's just, do it! So they just start acting, and Celestia is just not getting it at all. I'd make fun of the fact that Celestia doesn't understand the concept of acting, except I know people like that. In fact, I know a lot of people like that. Like a huge amount. Most people I know do not understand how to act, do not comprehend that kind of a thing. It's like Eclectic Oak. Now, Eclectic Oak is actually one of my best actors ever. I can tell that with definitiveness because they've never done any acting for me, ever. Just saying, Eclectic. You get a mic, we'll make something happen. Thank you for the bits, as always. I do always appreciate. Thank you. Oh, yeah, by the way, I should probably give praise to, I've already forgotten her name, the woman who plays Celestia. Because it's actually harder than it sounds, and everyone says this, but it remains true. It's harder than it sounds to do bad acting well. To properly sound with the wrong syllables and emphasis and actually come... That takes... there's an effort that goes into doing it. I can only do it for a short period of time myself, because so much of my acting career has been spent trying to be more fluid and more normal. When you're acting, the goal, generally speaking, is to sound like you're actually the character, actually speaking actual words that the character thinks. So an enormous amount of acting all boils down to sounding as natural as possible. having all those little nuances and all those little slow cadences with regards to how you emphasize what. All of that's a talent, and I just did it in the sentence I just said, if you were paying any kind of attention. By contrast, if I were to read a sentence improperly and come across as lines being read, you know, there's a talent to basically shut down the instinct and to replace it with doing it wrong, you know. So absolute praise to Nicole Oliver for doing that correctly. That takes some work. All right, so this then leads to Twilight teleporting back and forth. I was about to comment in my notes about how she's getting so much better at her range, and then I realized that Celestia is just in the school, and the play is still here. Now that's still good range. That's still like a good quarter of a mile, or 0.75 of a click, something like that. But I just wanted to comment on that. Clearly, she's getting better at her kind of a range. Anyways. This then leads to her not being able to do charades. Once again, I'd like to make fun, but I know people like that who just absolutely do not know how to physically communicate the fact that there's a thing which they're trying to explain to you. Instead, they'd just be like, you ever play charades with someone who's terrible at charades? Because I have. Anyways. So... so Pinky is interesting. Yeah. The expressions are awesome in this whole episode. I hate to continue praising the animation, but continued praise for the animation, because holy crap, there's a lot of really good stuff. Although I've noticed they've started leaning on the depth and field button a little bit too hard, and I know that's a style choice, I just hate it. Depth of field is when you blur out the stuff that's not in focus. There's ways to do it well, and there's ways to do it poorly, and I think they just lean a little bit too heavily on this episode. But other than that, I like to think that Trixie, aside from, you know, doing shows, which is what she loves to do, she stays solvent. You know, she keeps her bills paid by selling back alley fireworks regularly. I also like to think that her main customer is Pinky, who regularly buys fireworks from Trixie. That just amuses me, that thought. I don't know. Moving on. So then Twilight absolutely loses it. Oh yeah, magic fireworks too, excuse me. This is... I've talked before about lies. We've actually brought this up in this very show, because lies have come up several times. And this is one of the biggest reasons I keep telling my niece not to lie. There's two big reasons, actually. The first is, if you lie and cover it up, then we can't fix the problem. That is the most obvious thing that's being on display here in this very episode. But the second reason is, if you lie and cover it up, it's going to hurt more. If I break your thing and then lie to you about it, you have two things to now be upset by. Just purely mathematically, the upset factor has increased, either by an actual factor, multiplicative, or just by addition. Now I have two things to be upset about, right? And that's exactly what they also display in this episode. If she had told her from the beginning, Celestia would probably have been a little bit hurt, but at least she could have worked through it. Instead, now she's upset about both being lied to and the fact that she sucks at acting. So that's cute. What's interesting to me is the episode has 6 minutes left at this point. So they send Spike out to delay. This isn't great, because apparently Spike is terrible. They literally throw tomatoes at him. Spike has plenty of stage presence and is more than capable of entertaining people. Not only have we seen this before several times, we see this in this very episode. Shrug. I know, he was probably just a little bit stressed, and Lord knows we know what Spike's like under stress. Remember the Olympic Games? I forget what they called them. The Equestrian Games, I guess? Something like that. Anyways. Then they hate Spike, yada yada yada, and then Celestia comes back, and then what happens is really, really weird. Because what Celestia does is she comes back and immediately takes charge. Now, I started jotting down ideas of her being a leader and having command presence, but then I realized that none of that is what she's doing. What she's doing is directing. Everything she does and says is the job of a director or a producer. There's some bleed over there. And she just tells all of them what they need to do and how they need to do it. She even gives acting direction to Fluttershy, for God's sakes. She tells Spike how to roll with it. She tells everyone how to get the props set up. She just straight up directs it, and I'm just like, huh. I'd like to read into that. But at the same time, if Celestia has any capacity or qualities as a commanding leader, if she does any actual role as being a leader, then yeah, she probably would make a good director because she's used to this kind of thing. And Celestia ideologically believes in the very concept of a play. The idea of people gathering together and working together to make a greater whole, harmony, entertainment, etc. We already talked about that. So the idea that Celestia slides neatly into the director's seat doesn't actually bother me all that much. And again, kind of fits. Anyway, so then Spike does what we in the business refer to as rolling with it. If you don't know what that means in acting specifically, that's when you take a performance that's going badly and use that to improve it. Any good stand-up comedian knows how to roll with it. And what Spike does is pretty much exactly that. They send out a play because of the issues, they're all damaged, so everyone makes fun of them. But when Spike rolls with it, the automatic inclinations shift, because now instead of mockery, they're laughing with it, because now it's a comedy. It's okay to laugh at a comedy, right? And you see how it just shifts the tone completely there, right? Anyways, and then Celestia actually raises the sun, which is, yeah, that's pretty cool. And they get the special effects, and everyone's super impressed, and it's all awesome. And then Celestia mentions that she never felt that she had to be on stage to be part of the show. I mentioned that line. She actually says that as part of another line. But she mentions that line, and speaking as someone who, historically speaking, spent most of my acting time in the booth, I'm actually completely with that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people who are not on camera, or the people who are over there doing their own thing on the side and making sure that the cameras are working, or that the lights are working, or that the script is being followed, or that the props are being done, or that the grips are doing their job, and all that fun stuff. There's a lot that goes into even just a simple stage play, never mind a full-time production. I found myself wondering if that was a bit of a specific thing, because Lord knows that a lot of people work on an animation that never actually go on camera. And then Celestia decides to quit her job and become an actress full-time. I mean, she'd probably be a good director. Oh yeah, and Luna was upset at the sun being raised. It's clear, yeah, so I should comment on that in case it comes up. It is still clearly nighttime. She is temporarily raising the sun as a prop. Hence, Luna being like, what are you doing? Quit it. Either way, this episode was an interesting one to go through, to say the least. I probably have a little bit more of an attachment to it than I would, because I act every day of my life. But this was written by Kaita, last name, and I'm not even try. I don't want to screw it up. And this is their first entry into the series, first thing that they've written. I have to admit that there's a few things that kind of make me go with regard to the episode. But I do think this is definitely, I think yellow is the floor for this one. I think it can't go below that. There's a lot of good animation. There's some great acting. There's some great bad acting. There's some questionable stuff that requires us to go through a couple of hoops to explain it. You know, like why Celestia's a bad actress to begin with, and why she's a good director to begin with, all that fun stuff. Why Twilight is willing to lie to her. And I do think the episode missed the mark a little bit. If it had fixated a little bit more on what I was talking about earlier, you know, telling someone the truth and figuring out, like, if the dilemma hadn't been, what do we do, Celestia sucks, it had been, how do we inform Celestia that she sucks? I think that alone would have pushed the episode up substantially, because that's a lot more MLP, if I'm being honest. It's a lot more nuanced, and it's a lot more real-life applicable. Instead, it was, we need to keep quiet about it. And and I didn't even mention this, but Pinky and her various replacements for the sun were obviously quite amusing. I did kind of mention the fireworks, but still. I'm leaning towards orange myself. I see several people saying orange or red. You know, but definitely, I do think above average, which is what orange effectively means, is something that I could easily label this one as. That's certainly a good first outing. And we get some good characterization for Celestia, which, you know, is always nice. Whoops. There we go. I think we're going to go with orange. Orange it is. Next episode. Let's see, what is next? Like I said, I'm kind of in the blind at this point. Apparently, next episode is going to involve... I can't think of his name. Wizard Dude. I think it was her name. This is by Dave Rapp, which I think we've had before. There he is. Oh, this should be interesting. This is an 8 episode. Yeah, Sunburst, that's his name. The Parent Map. So Dave Rapp has written a green, a blue, and a yellow before. We'll see what we think of this one in about 25 minutes.